And our lead this hour comes from the Motor City. The Vikings visiting town for an NFC North matchup. And if you had the Lions not winning a game all season, you are a loser. You are a big, fat loser. If you didn't see the game, you missed quite the finish here. As the Detroit Lions matriculated the ball down the field, and Jared Goff threw an 11-yard touchdown pass as time expired. The Vikings had to throw in the sponge. The previously winless Detroit football team gets a 29-27 win over the Minnesota football team in the Motor City. Goff led the Lions on a 75-yard matriculation of the football on the deciding possession there without a timeout. That is a mortal sin for the Minnesota defense. That came after Kirk Cousins had thrown a go-ahead 3-yard pass play for the touchdown to Justin Jefferson with 1:50 left. You assumed at that point that the Vikings would hold on and win the game, but no! The Vikings failed on a 2-point conversion for the third time, and knock, knock on the door. That's opportunity. The Lions taking advantage. Goff throwing 2 touchdown passes in the first half. Detroit actually led this game. They were the ones that were in the lead. Minnesota came back to take the lead. Detroit ahead by 14 points, and that was the biggest lead the Lions have had all year in a season of stink bombs. What smells? P.U. That would be the Lions. But against the Vikings, the Lions have met their match, and they have found someone who is at their level. And then, of course, Jared Goff in the second half allowed Minnesota to rally back in the game because that's what Jared Goff does. He turned the ball over twice in the second half. But in the end, the Lions come out victorious. The better story here in the losing locker room as the pedal to the metal in the Twin Cities. Let us discuss the question. Is this game more significant for the Lions winning, getting off the schneid, or for the Vikings losing? And the answer here, it's not even close, is Minnesota. It's rather insignificant that the Lions ended up winning this game. They'd already had a tie, so they weren't going to lose every game. It's just a matter of whether they won or not. But the better story is on the Minnesota side, as this should be the final nail in the coaching coffin of Mike Zimmer. And I've got the tetanus shot blueprint and Mike Lindell. And we will combine all of these things together into a nice, neat MALLER monologue. We'll see where this takes us. All right, so A, there is no way that Mike Zimmer can justify his job. When he gets called into the principal's office and Mike, can you please explain to me how every other team has taken care of the Lions? And some of the games have been close, but the Lions had never led by 14 points, and you had to fight back and then blow the game against the Lions. How do you justify us keeping your job? Well, there's really nothing Mike Zimmer can say. It's a matter of when, not if, the Grim Reaper comes knocking at the door with a pink slip. And so that makes this a much more meaningful loss for the Vikings as opposed to a significant win for the Lions. What would the defense be, though, if you're Mike Zimmer? You say, well, we need stability. Well, is that really stability, or is it mediocrity? Trying to defend the indefensible, a coaching sin to lose to the Lions in the manner that the Vikings did. Minnesota barely came back to beat the Lions the first time these teams played. Remember, that was a fluke of an ending in that game. And the reality is that Mike Zimmer's Vikings are lucky they didn't go 0-2 against Detroit. The biggest pushovers in the NFL in terms of wins and losses, wins and blankety-blank losses. And the Vikings are fortunate they didn't go 0-2. They could very easily have done that. And so what the Vikings need at this point is a tetanus shot. They have been contaminated with stank. And they play everyone, the good teams and the bad teams, close, which puts them in an odd category in the NFL because the Vikings are able to play against everyone. They just beat the Green Bay Packers a couple weeks ago. And 2 weeks later, you lose to the Lions. I mean, that is, talk about helter-skelter. That's the definition of erratic, and that you look at the coaching staff. Oh, well, they've had injuries. Well, everyone's had injuries. You know how we feel about injuries on this show, that is part of the business of football. And it is not a excuse card that is acceptable, that you should not be using that as an excuse. That's why you have backups. Now, part B of this, Minnesota, they don't have an obvious coach in waiting on staff. And that's where this gets dicey. So the question is, should Mike Zimmer be fired? Yes. And I was pro Mike Zimmer. I'm now off that bandwagon. Should Mike Zimmer be fired? Sure. But there's no one to pivot to and say, all right, let me throw the keys at you. You get to take over. The Vikings have a coaching staff built on nepotism. It's not what you know, it's who you know, or in this case, your DNA profile. Clint Kubiak, the spawn of a longtime NFL coach, both head and offensive coordinator. The co-defensive coordinator is Adam Zimmer, the coach's kid. It's the family business, which leaves on the staff the co-defensive coordinator, Andre Patterson, or the special teams coach, Ryan Ficken. Either one of those two cats to be the interim head coach, and that's it. There's no one else that you look at and say, oh, there's an obvious choice to be the interim coach of the Vikings. So you have to believe that was part of the blueprint of Mike Zimmer. This is not his first rodeo. He's been around a long time. And so when you put a staff together like this, you've insulated yourself to some degree. It makes it that much more difficult on ownership. If there was someone in waiting that was a hotshot coach who you could say, that guy right there, let's see what that guy can do to close out the year, then you'd make the obvious move. But there's no name that I'm looking at, unless I'm missing something here, and maybe I am, but there's no one I'm looking at the coaching staff that I say, okay, that's the guy. So it's hard to fire the coach with a few weeks left when you have no clear coach worth his salt to take over. Now, the risk is that if you don't fire Mike Zimmer, that there's such a up and down Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde team that they start winning a few games, and now they end up in the playoffs and they become playoff fodder as the last team in. In the NFC, you just have to be 500 to get in. And Minnesota comes right back, and they play Thursday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the Thursday game this week in Week 14. So it's a quick turnaround, and the Steelers are not an invincible team. There's a team that the Vikings could go out and win that game, and then they're back in the win column, and then what do? And so you look at job security. If the Vikings are going to get rid of Mike Zimmer, it's got to come down here early in the day on a Monday. When the sun comes up, the announcement should be made. Now, again, the odds are that Zimmer's gone, but not right now. That this does not happen immediately because there's no one in waiting there. Minnesota has the Bears twice. Those are games that you figure you win. If they beat the Steelers and then the Bears twice, that's 3 more wins. So then they have to either beat the Rams, and depends which Ram team shows up, and then win at the Packers. But there's a path to the Vikings to still make the playoffs. So this should be a fireable offense based on performance by the Vikings. All right, last word here. So let's go over to the lines. Jared Goff getting credited with a victory for that late game-winning drive, and it would not have been possible without the generosity. It is the season of giving, and the Minnesota Vikings, a franchise known as the Purple People Eaters back in the day for their aggressive defense and their dominating defense. But what a bunch of softies on defense here. For the balance of this game, Jared Goff was the same old Jared Goff. Blah. For 58 minutes, roughly, give or take, it was the same Jared Goff. He had a couple of touchdowns. He had an interception, a passer rating around 90, a little over 90. That is about where Jared Goff has been in his career. Then, at the 58-minute mark, Mike Zimmer and the Viking defensive staff, which is really just Mike Zimmer, said, you know what, let's just kind of play a soft defense, prevent defense, And then Jared Goff went 9 out of 13. And that includes a spike. So really 9 out of 12 for 80 yards and the touchdown. And that is a 120.2 passer rating on the final drive. So really the Vikings, I don't know if they're sponsored by Mike Lindell, but that is a MyPillow type of performance there by the Minnesota Vikings defense in the final part of the game. And the biggest sin of all is the defense on the final play, what turned out to be the game-winning touchdown, no time left. You're playing 10 yards back. And it's akin to, in baseball, we see this where you play defense, play the infield up, and you're trying to throw out the runner at home plate. And that turns a 265 hitter into a 365 hitter, and it turns a marginal quarterback, a below average to average quarterback, Jared Goff, into a top-notch quarterback. You go from second-rate to top-notch. Jared Goff's eyes turned into saucers on that final drive. And so Dan Campbell gets into the win column. Detroit, it's perfect for the Lions because they get the win, but because they are so far behind everyone else, they still maintain the number one pick in the 2022 draft. So it's a win-win. But the story here is on the Viking side of things. My goodness. Here is Mike Zimmer trying to rationalize another loss in a nail-biting game for his Vikings.
Played all these close games. They're going to come down to either win or lose. And that's just the way the NFL is.
That's just the way it is. Let me quote a movie. All right, here's more. Here's Mike Zimmer. Again, you'll hear the question and the answer about the state of the Vikings.
How is the team doing after a loss like this?
I already told you what I said to them, but they're not doing good.
Yeah, they're not doing good. What about you? You're not doing good either. My goodness. Pathetic.